My name is Amalia Issa, and I am founding director of Personalized Medicine Targeted Therapeutics Center. I'm also a professor of health policy and pharmaceutical sciences at the University of Sciences in Philadelphia. And my co-conspirator there is Jill Bartlet from McGill University. We have worked together for many years and are close collaborators and close friends. I'll let her introduce herself in a few minutes. But I do want to hear about yourselves and your interests, and if we could just go around the room maybe and say your name, where you're from, and maybe why you're interested in this topic, just in a very, very briefly, as people are coming in. So let's start with you.
Hi, my name is Jillian Bartlet, and I'm a postdoc at Kaiser Permanente's Division of Research and Development. And a lot of my research is on food prescribing and overdose prevention. And I guess I was interested in this topic because I work in a learning health system right now, and so I'm constantly thinking about how to engage stakeholders in what I do.
Oh.
So thinking about how these topics might fit.
Okay.
We're just doing introductions. Go ahead.
My name's England. I work for Jillian Bartlet in Basel. I'm obviously interested in precision medicine, given the products I work with.
All right, thank you.
We're doing one side of the room or skipping the aisle?
Let's just go down one road and then down the other. So right behind Ian.
My name is Christine Dunn. I'm from Boston University. I'm an assistant professor there. I'm a health services researcher, and so I do some intervention work around mostly cancer screening and the use of genetic testing in patients who are at risk for cancer.
Thank you.
I'm a surgeon turned epidemiologist and expert on cancer screening, and I work in Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York.
Okay, Memorial Sloan Kettering. Very nice. How about yourself?
I'm not good at an English conversation, but I can understand the two. Sorry.
Well, thank you.
Hi, I'm Katie Martinez. I'm an assistant professor at Cleveland Clinic, and most of my work is around personalized decision-making for anticoagulation relief.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm Diana Bust. I'm from Kaiser Permanente Washington Research Institute. I have been doing cancer research and outcomes for a long time. I also work in the learning health system and run a K-12 program in the learning health system. And I'm working on a new project in shared decision-making. I'm Nikki Bowe. I'm a patient partner with Kaiser Permanente Northwest, and I'm invited guest.
Wonderful. We're glad to have you. Thank you. Hadley.
I'm Hadley Smith. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, and I'm interested in economic evaluation of genetic testing for pediatric patients.
My name is Lin. Last name Cui. I'm a statistician at Eli Lilly and Company. I'm a research scientist there, interested in precision medicine.
Thank you.
I'm Anik Patel. I'm from Amgen, and I work on oncology. So interested in this course because we have this ideas on how to incorporate patients into clinical development of precision medicine.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Come on in and join us. There's some seats right up here. Thank you. Please come on in. We're just going doing introductions right now, so please join us.
So, hi, my name is Gleb Donin. I'm assistant professor in Technical University in Prague, Czech Republic. And I'm doing research regarding health technology assessment focused on medical equipment. And here I'm interested in how to engage patients in that assessment process.
Very good. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carmen Lewis from the University of Colorado, and my research interest is in individualized decision-making for older patients with multi-morbidity.
Thank you. And we have a few people who joined us as we were going through. Sir?
My name is John Godina. I'm a PhD student at the health policy program at Harvard University, and my research currently is in individualized care and applying that to decision modeling.
Great. Thank you. And Robert.
Robert Ham, I'm a psychologist in a family medicine department, and I'm interested in shared decision
Oh, okay, complex things. Well, we're certainly talking about complex things. Well, welcome everyone. We're very happy that you are here, and welcome to the course, and welcome to Portland. Is this anybody's first time to Portland? Oh, wow. Okay, quite a few. Well, I hope you'll have an opportunity to get out and visit Portland. And I'm not from here, but I have been here before, so there are some really interesting things to see around. So I hope you'll have that opportunity to do. Just a few logistical things. If you do go out the door, on your right there will be bathrooms if you need them, and then there's I guess some refreshments later on for the break that are set up in that area. So just so to be aware of that. So very good. We are going to get started. We have a break in between, and we're going to kind of divide the course into two. And this is going to be a very interactive course. So expect to be engaged. We are talking about engagement, and expect to be engaged. We do have to give. This is the disclosure slide. I don't really have anything to disclose that is of importance. And the first thing we're going to do, actually, to get you all engaged and thinking about things is something I call the SMDM family feud. So I need about maybe 2 families that we're going to create here. Maybe 3 people on this side and 3 people on that side. Not sure if we should have them stand up. Maybe just stand up on 3 volunteers from this side, please. Just you can stand at your
Don't
seats.
be shy. You're going to get picked on the
You
entire
are.
course, so if
Okay.
you don't volunteer now,
Yeah, that's right.
it's going to be later.
That's right. Okay. Okay, perfect. So I got 3 people
Need
here,
one
and I need 1 more person on this side. Okay, 1 more person? Come on, 1 more person. All right. Okay, now your first task is to pick a name for your family on the right side here. Now, and don't use a real name. No, just use a fun name. So it can be a descriptive name that you might think of.
Now you guys have to think of a new name.
So I'll give you a hint. I tried this with a class of students, and they came up with exomes or genes or things like that. So let's see if you can be as creative. What's that? Maybe we don't want to be that political. Okay. All right. Do we have our names? You are going to go with Smith? Okay. And you are going to go with Putin? Really? All right. We will do that then. Okay. So, well, here is your first question. What do you consider the top 3 sources of healthcare data today? Please join us. There's plenty of seats in the front. And we are having a very interactive, fun exercise. Probably different than some of the other SMDM courses you're used to. I should have brought the buzzer along.
Is this in the US? Yeah, is this US based?
What's that?
Is this US based?
This is actually a US-based survey, yes. Yes, that's right. It is actually based on a real survey. Yeah, it's based on an actual survey. And I'm going to give you the actual results afterwards. So it is US-based. It's a survey of healthcare executives and clinicians. So nationally based survey in the US. So I'll give you that much of a hint. So you got to pick. Yeah, you got to pick. All right. Are you ready, Team Putin? Okay, Team Putin's ready. Wearables, EMRs, and claims data. Okay. All right. Okay, claims data, wearables, EMRs. How about you? What do you think?
Claims, mobile phone.
Yeah, we came up with the same.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's see what the survey actually says. So it says clinical data, cost data, and claims data make up the top 3 most useful sources of healthcare data today. Okay, that's today.
Cost data and claim data are,
Not quite.
what's the difference?
Well, I don't know why they have it differentiated that way, but
Claims data is what goes through on an insurance claim.
yeah.
Cost data
Is-
they could be other than, say, for example, a physician's
Yeah.
billing, it could be hospitalization beds, it could be
Yeah.
supplies, all sorts of things. And clinical data would be what the clinicians capture in the EMR.
That's
So it might
right.
be prescriptions that might not be captured in the costing claims.
Yeah. So you had your EMR, so you were right about that, and you had claims, and you had claims. Okay, so we had 2 here and 1 there. Great. You had EHR as well. Okay, well, 2 for 2 then. All right, let's see. Next question. What do you think the top 3 sources of healthcare data will be in 5 years? I'm going to let the Smith family go first this time. In 5 years. So not now, but in the future. This actually comes from a real survey. See if I can find a buzzer or something on here to make noise.
So we're going with genetic data,
Genetic data, okay.
mobile or device data,
Mobile or device data, okay.
and still clinical data.
And clinical data. Okay. All right, Team Putin, you got to tell us what you think now.
Wait, did they say what they wanted?
Yeah, they did. It's your turn. It doesn't matter. You have to tell me what you think.
So, given the topic of the course, we decided, genetic data, where are those data, and the EHR will just keep being used.
Okay, very good. So this is in fact, you both did a great job. Both teams did a great job. Thank you very much. And in fact, what we find is clinical data is going to decrease, according to the survey of executive healthcare professionals and clinicians, and we had the 682 responses. It's going to decrease from 95% to 82%. And if you look at claims data, it's decreasing from 45% to 32%. Patient-generated data, so things like wearables and the things that you were mentioning are going up to 40%. And genomic data, look at that, from 17% all the way to 40%. And then patient preference data is also something that's increasing. So you guys know your stuff, so great job, thank you. So let me tell you a little bit more about this survey. Thank you, take your seats, thank you very much. You did a round of applause for both families. So let me tell you a little bit about this survey. These are the survey respondent characteristics. This was a survey published in the New England Journal of Medicine Catalyst. We will make the slides available afterwards as well to you if you wish. And this is the respondent profile. We had 50% of clinicians, 23% executives, and then clinician leaders. Mostly they worked in hospital systems and health systems. Then there were physician organizations. Mainly they worked in nonprofit organizations as opposed to for-profit organizations. And the majority worked in fairly large hospital systems with about just under or close to 500 beds. And you can see all this information. So that gives you a sense of who was answering this survey and what kind of expectations they have for the type of data they have. Okay, so now that I have convinced you that why it's important for all of us to better understand decisions related to genomics and genomic data and patient-generated data. So combining this information from devices, from patient feedback, from patient biomarkers. What I'd like to do in the remaining time that I have before Jill talks about Anthony's game is to give you an overview of precision medicine, which I think not many of you need, it seems, but I didn't know that when I prepared the talk. And so it'll be a bit of a quick museum-guided tour and share with you one innovative approach, one tool, some of the things we've learned from engaging patients for the precision medicine era. So I think we all agree that the precision medicine era has arrived, and this definition is often the typical definition that is typically promoted by the NIH and others. And this is fairly new, relatively new, well, from January data showing that 25 of the 59 new molecular entities that the FDA approved in the last year were precision medicine. So they keep trending upwards. If you can see from 2014 all the way through 2018, 42% now of the medications are pharmacogenomic-based or precision medicine-based medications. And I'm sure many of you are aware that the FDA has a publicly available site of all the approved drugs with pharmacogenomic labeling in the drug label, and you can access this quite easily. And now they've actually done something even better, and you can actually export it as an Excel file if you so wish, if you want to use it for research purposes. So you can do that if you are interested in doing that. And of course, the cost of sequencing the human genome continues to go down. This, of course, is the famous slide that many people use in presentations that is found on the NIH website. And you're all familiar with the NIH's All of Us research program? No? Okay. Well, it is actively recruiting 1 million volunteers. And what they're trying to do is trying to get 1 million people from diverse backgrounds to participate, share their health data online, which includes health surveys of electronic health records, physical measurements, blood, urine samples, etc., as well as genomic data. Go to places where they can get tested, spit in tubes or get blood samples. They want to store these in a secure biobank with appropriate protections and collect it, and they want to have, and they are trying to recruit 1 million people from across the country to do this so that researchers can study this data and gain all sorts of information and make sure, and diversity is important. Both ethnic and racial diversity is very important in order to be able to accomplish the goals of the All of Us research program. And if you are interested in finding out more information, there's a lot more information on the All of Us research site that the NIH has put up. This was published earlier this year in the MIT Tech Review, and it shows the total number of people tested by consumer genetics companies through January of 2019 in millions. We are just over 25 million people who have gotten some kind of consumer genomic testing, which is quite impressive, quite remarkable. So precision medicine then is projected to lead to wider adoption of collecting patients' genetic and other molecular information as part of routine medical care, improved ability to predict which treatments will work best for specific patients, better understanding of the underlying mechanisms by which various diseases occur, improved approaches to preventing, diagnosing, treating a wide range of diseases, and better integration of, hopefully, electronic health records in patient care, along with those calls for more open data sharing that will hopefully allow us for a greater harmonization of care for patients. And that's kind of where we seem to be heading in the precision medicine field and precision medicine world. And this is kind of the mission, or I guess the objectives or the goals of precision medicine, to be able to use it for molecular profiling, prognostic markers, and markers for both prediction and as well as disease sensitivity. So we know that with all the data that's out there, in about 10 years or so, every individual will be surrounded by a virtual cloud of billions of data points that are going to pertain to them. And I think this slide kind of shows that in a fairly dramatic, schematic way. So precision medicine is pretty much a game changer on so many levels, and it generally puts the patient front and center. It's a very, I think we can all agree to some degree, it's a pretty patient-centric way to practice medicine. But it also comes with a whole host of what I think of as decision points of complexity. I think it does complexify. Not sure that's quite a verb, but it does increase the complexity of decision making. And so I wanted to go through some of the points of decision points of complexity. Then and I only selected 4, but there's certainly others, and we can discuss those as you might be thinking of others. So one of them is that it has to do with how it impacts diagnostic categories. So as we learn more about the molecular mechanisms underlying many diseases, our knowledge of those diseases is becoming more precise. So we no longer talk about breast cancer, we talk about specific subtypes of breast cancer. Or as you can see in this slide, we used to talk about, 40 years ago, chronic leukemia, acute leukemia, pre-leukemia. And now we have all these different types of leukemia, 38 subtypes of leukemia identified, 51 types of lymphoma identified, etc. And this is opening up real opportunities for all sorts of targeted interventions. However, I think it's also leading to decisional confusion and even decisional fatigue when patients have discussions with physicians and try to wrap their minds about having a particular diagnosis of a very particular cancer, where cancer is one of the areas where precision medicine is certainly very, very much at the forefront, but also it's also true in other areas of medicine as well. What does it mean to now have a disease that's based on a specific genetic mutation or a particular variant? And how does that, doing so, how does that expand the treatment options and therefore expand the number and types of decisions that might need to be made? So you can see how we now add to the complexity of decision making when we have this. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is something we need to think about in terms of how we deal with it and how we engage each other as clinicians, as scientists, but also with patients as well. A second area has to do with preemptive testing. Preemptive precision medicine testing aims to optimize medication use by having genetic information at the point of prescribing and at the point of care. This is actually a very attractive feature of precision medicine. This is one of the star points that's actually made about in terms of benefits when we think about precision medicine. Preemptive testing can be beneficial in terms of making decisions regarding preventative measures or various treatments, but there is certainly variation in terms of clinical validity or clinical utility, and these concepts are very much, or can be sometimes, a moving target. And in many cases, the results returned are variants of uncertain significance. So you've heard that term before, variants of uncertain significance, where we're not always sure what this might mean, at least not yet. So this could lead to situations of anxiety for patients where they might demand preemptive surgeries, which might not be necessary, or perhaps lead to other types of anxiety. So there's a situation where we're, again, dealing with a decision point of complexity brought about by precision medicine. And here's just a slide to kind of very briefly explain these concepts of clinical validity versus clinical utility. Now, here's an interesting piece related to that. A few months ago in April, the FDA sent a letter to Inova Health System, which is a large health system in Northern Virginia, based in Fairfax County, warning them about one of their latest ventures, which is an on-site genomics testing facility. Now, this is not a direct-to-consumer, for-profit company. It's not one of those companies. It's actually an actual large health system with hospitals based in Northern Virginia, and it happens to have created, as part of its precision medicine program, this genomics testing lab facility. And the concerns that the FDA raised were not with all of the testing that was going on, but with the validity of some of the tests. And I'm just going to highlight some of the, it had to do with the fact that some of the tests predicted patients' response to specific medications based on certain genetic variants. So I'm going to highlight only a bit of the, this is from the actual FDA warning letter. It said that it indicates that tests reported by your MediMap tests provide, quote, actionable and informational guidance, and that, quote, healthcare providers can use these results confidently in making treatment decisions. And then it goes on to say, the FDA is concerned that the clinical validity of your MediMap tests has not been established for their intended uses. Specifically, we are unaware of data establishing the relationships between the genotypes assessed by your test and your assertion regarding drug response for multiple drugs, for example, and they provide a certain example. So that's an example of something that does happen, actually with some fair frequency, where the FDA does send warning letters from time to time, sometimes to companies, sometimes to health systems, and just to kind of say, slow down a bit, because there's concerns about clinical validity or analytical validity sometimes. So again, these are the kinds of things where we are seeing how precision medicine, just because of where we're at in the field, can lead to these decision-making points of complexity. Another closely related issue has to do with uncertainty and ambiguity. The volume and complexity of genomic data makes it difficult for providers to interpret insights. There was a study that showed, please come on in and join us, that only 29% of providers are able to use genomics, environment, and lifestyle data to tailor treatment decisions. So when we talk about precision medicine involving genomics, environment, and lifestyle data, that combination of data as being part and parcel of precision medicine, and we're finding out that only 29% of providers are able to really interpret and receive and provide actionable insights from that, I think that's concerning. It's also true that next generation sequencing for precision medicine in many cases still largely relies on collecting large amounts of data on the patient, which is good in theory. And basically what happens is a specific treatment is identified by computationally comparing big data to a reliable set of even bigger data with the hope of finding the right treatment or the right appropriate match. And in practice, this approach shows that only about 7% in certain cancers benefits patients from this kind of genomic approach. So we're not quite there yet with the science. We're working towards it. So there's still some ambiguity in terms of how we rely on big data. So those are 4 areas really or at least 3 areas of increased precision medicine complexity. Here's an interesting quote I found from Thomas Getz, who used to be the editor for Wired magazine, and he had gone at some point and compared 2 companies. I'm not going to mention the company names, but he had compared 2 consumer genomics companies. And what he had, I just thought these quotes were quite intriguing and insightful. And he said, with this first company, you notice when you get your results is how subtle the differences are between the average person's risk for disease and your own. For colorectal cancer, for instance, my results tell me that I have a 0.21 out of 100 chance of developing the disease, compared to a 0.26 out of 100 average risk. That may be a scientifically valid distinction, but as a consumer, it is so slight as to be of no difference. He has a point. For company B, on the other hand, he says, quote, uses a different method of calculating your genetic risk. It generates a lifetime risk analysis that results in what the company believes are stronger calls. Certainly the numbers seem more emphatic. Examples I saw showed, for instance, a person with a 51% risk of heart disease compared to an average 42% risk. That's a striking difference. So what he's talking about is how we present data, right? And how we present data to consumers and to patients matters. And so that is something that we should be thinking about in terms of how we engage patients, but also how we present the data in terms of, particularly in terms of precision medicine. Fourth, data is overwhelming cognition. This is a real problem. This is from an actual study. It's been documented in many industries, not just in healthcare. As we are exposed to more data, we are experiencing decisional fatigue and decision paralysis. And in terms of what we're talking about here, this is particularly problematic as we are all kind of trying to work to improve the patient engagement experience. How do we reconcile providing patients with information and options, recognizing that we are all sometimes drowning in data, and making a high-quality decision is much more than simply providing people with information. So even when the data is good, it can lead to less than optimal decisions when we have this kind of a problem. So decision-making in the clinical setting is clearly a complex affair. As we all know. And precision medicine decisions, I would say, are pretty much a double-edged sword because we have constant innovation in treatments for patients, so there's a moving target. Treatments can offer trade-offs, and the decisions have multiple moving parts. And we do want to keep our focus on the fact that patient preferences and values are key deciding factors in many situations. And I put this slide up to remind us of what is an ideal decision in healthcare. I think where many of us, or most of us, are probably familiar with this quote from Sipucha in Health Affairs. It's a bit old, but I think it still is a very timely, very good quote. A patient-centered decision is one which reflects the needs, values, and express preferences of a well-informed patient. And I think you can see that part of the issue we have with precision medicine, with all the complexity, the decision points of complexity that I just presented to you, and many others as well, I've only presented about 4 of them, is this part about the well-informed patient. And of course as well, the well-informed physician and maybe the well-informed scientist, others as well. So these are issues we need to be grappling with. And so, of course, the Society for Medical Decision-Making is collectively a group of researchers and clinicians and patients all working towards this goal of trying to figure out how we can improve decision-making in healthcare settings. And you're all familiar with some of the instruments and tools that I have on this slide and the definitions. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through these in any great detail. And you know that some of these tools, like shared decision-making and various decision aids, have been more successful than others. But I would say that our new world of using precision medicine needs a new approach. And it calls for new tools, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So several years ago, I coined the term precision decisionomics. And my research center team and I have been conducting a variety of studies to better understand decision-making for precision medicine and precision medicine-enabled technologies and applications. And it's because we really need some more and better tools, and we can continue to try and work on improving and finding better ways to kind of be able to do these things, but provide possible outcomes, including the conversions of information from multiple data streams, which is what precision medicine provides, figure out how to present the probabilities of those outcomes, and always include patient preferences and values, and then weigh the desirability of the various outcomes and preferences. And our goal is really quite simple: to improve decision-making at the point of care whenever possible. So we've been investigating patient and also sometimes provider decision-making and preferences in various populations, and assessing various genomic diagnostic tests and other precision medicine technologies and applications, mainly using this instrument, which allows us to quantitatively measure the trade-offs that people and present choices to them randomly. So here are some of the research questions, kind of in general, that we've used with a whole variety of populations in various groups. And these are some of the papers that we've been building, this body of evidence related to decision-making surrounded precision medicine. So these are some of the papers. And the key to developing this and other tools is to kind of step back and realize that what we needed to do was to include the patient voice as well as that of providers, and apply a mixed methods approach using qualitative and quantitative methods as well as tools from user experience research. Because if we ever hope to integrate precision medicine routinely into clinical care, it's imperative to have a strong grasp of all the stakeholders and users involved. So part of the development process, we have conducted focus groups and semi-structured interviews and included patients in the process designed to better understand what are the features, the attributes that are important to patients. Things related to treatment side effects, outcomes, knowledge and questions about genomics, etc. And so here is kind of a flow diagram that illustrates a little bit more about the methodology in a nutshell, where patients have been included along with the researchers in some of these focus groups and interviews, looking at trying to ferret out the knowledge of genomics in various areas, in various populations, whether it's breast cancer, colon cancer, other areas, side effects, outcomes, etc. The research team is identifying themes. Research team sifts through and narrows down the quotes, and then the patient groups pick out similar quotes into piles, and then the attributes emerge for use in the survey instrument. So we kind of try to include the patients as part of the design in order to, in our instruments, so that we can identify attributes that are of importance to patients. So this is simplifying it somewhat, but I think for the purposes of the presentation. So here's just a couple of quotes from some of our focus groups. And you can see that whether we're talking about certain cancers or even something else, one of the things that always comes up has to do with accuracy. This is very important to patients. So, these are two different focus groups from two different cancers. Well, for genetic testing, I worry a lot about the accuracy. I worry a lot about accuracy because I didn't get accuracy in what I had, which surprised me. And on something that affects care like genetic testing does, it is hard for me to accept that they would do one test and they wouldn't have proper controls. Another patient said, if it were 98% accurate, I wouldn't need a confirmation. If it were just 90%, I would need a second test for confirmation. Interesting expectations for accuracy there. So here is one data set of data, just from one study. And what you'll see is both groups of patient populations find accuracy, again, to be of the most important attribute. And then the second most important attribute, and we have consistently found this in a number of studies with a number of patients, is recommendations from the physician. So that is, the oncologist recommended, or the doctor recommended that I do this test. And while this appears to, at first blush, contradict the literature and what we know about patient autonomy and patient engagement, I think this really speaks to the complexity of these decisions that we were talking about earlier. And then you'll see that later on, some of these other attributes somehow differ between these different patient populations. But you can see that, so they don't necessarily, they trade off privacy concerns for benefit, and the doctor recommendation is ranked highly consistently, and this suggests that doctors are seen, at least in precision medicine, as sort of indispensable intermediaries, which is very interesting because that's not always the case in other areas of medicine. And I think this is something that does speak to this idea that precision medicine does increase this complexity where people need or feel they need a little more guidance. Interesting result. So, another thing I wanted to share with you. So you've all heard the conventional wisdom that people just don't understand probabilities and statistics and can't really make decisions based on that information? Okay, well, let me share with you some interesting things. So here's an interesting study from Adam Kepek's lab from Cold Spring Harbor. And what they did is they wanted to see if they can quantify how well They could quantify the evidence that informs a person's decision, and they controlled for various factors, and then we see how well a statistical algorithm performed on the same evidence. So they created these video games to compare human and computer performance and had research participants listen to a stream of clicking sounds and determine which clicks were faster. And then the participants rated confidence in each choice on a scale of 1, random guess, to 5, high confidence. They found that the human responses were statistically significantly similar to those that the computer generated. So it seems that the brain produces feelings of confidence that inform decisions the same way that using statistics, a program can pull patterns out of noisy data. And they also did another test and had participants answer questions comparing the populations of different countries. And even in this case, in which you have to account for each participant's individual knowledge base, this model still held true. So basically, we can probably say we each have sort of an inner or intuitive statistician. So back to our genomics data. What we've shown in multiple studies in different populations is that you can give participants, in this case breast and colon cancer patients, probabilities in this case that required them to trade off probabilities related to improved outcomes or cure versus side effects, and they can do it. They can do this kind of mathematical probabilities. And what's interesting here is that when we take a deeper look at how or why patients make these decisions, we find that they're weighing the benefits and risks of each alongside other values and preferences, such as quality of life issues, having young children at home at the time of diagnosis and treatment, and importantly, what their loved ones would think. So one of the attributes that comes up out of including patients as part of the design of these studies is what their loved ones would think. That's an important attribute to patients that often researchers would never have, as researchers, we would never have thought of. And so we're grateful to patients for that. And for those who might be wondering what patients think about the use of AI and algorithms, here are a few interesting quotes, something else I wanted to present. We use them, algorithms, in banking, online shopping, everywhere else. I don't see why not, in terms of using them in healthcare. In the interest of time, the algorithm can probably make a more sound decision about what's wrong with you faster. We all know doctors are pressed for time these days. Another person said, the computer's less likely to judge me based on what I look like. I mean, doctors make snap decisions about if you're too fat or AA or whatever. The computer doesn't care. So, some interesting findings from a whole variety of different studies. So we believe it's important to involve patients at every step in the development of new instruments, and also to keep working towards developing innovative ways to improve satisfaction with care, knowledge about relevant genomic diagnostics, disease-specific information and treatment options, our understanding of decisional conflict, and shared decision-making. And our instruments does just that. And I want to share with you, check the time here. Oh, we're doing okay for time. Because it allows us to provide real-time individual level preferences from patients, quantify trade-offs, utilities. It's certainly more accurate than simple surveys or other tools, leverages information about genomics, patient-specific values and preferences and probabilities. But I want to share with you what I always try to begin with, and I call these my 3 simple but powerful starter critical questions when we talk about engagement and thinking about decision-making. And they seem really quite simple, but when we take a step back and actually ask these questions, it does force us to kind of start thinking and seeing things through the eyes of patients and through others, and through other stakeholders as well. What do they need to know? When do they need to know it? And what difference does it make? And so just to summarize a few of the interesting things we've learned that I've told you about, and I haven't presented everything, but just want to kind of give you a brief summary. Among various populations, patients want physicians to be intermediaries, contrary to some of the conventional wisdom about patient autonomy when deciding about genomic testing. They want physicians to make specific recommendations. they are willing to trade privacy for benefit. We seem to have an inner intuitive statistician who is capable of computing statistical confidence up to a certain point. There's also less concern about algorithms and the use of AI in healthcare by patients than there is by researchers and maybe by clinicians as well. And precision medicine is here to stay with all its benefits and its complexities. Patient-centered healthcare needs to continue to evolve. So we need to get used to working with constant change, disruptive trends, and new trends that will make the way that you and I do research, clinical care, and interacting with patients continually and dynamically evolving. I'd like to share with you one more story because I think it illustrates an important point. In 2010, there was a massive volcanic eruption in Iceland by this volcano with an unpronounceable name. So I'm not even going to try. You might remember that. And within 12 hours of that volcanic eruption, the scientists working at the Met, that's the British Meteorological Service, using computer modeling and predictive analytics, so they were using big data techniques, had correctly predicted that the plume of ash from the volcano would spread across much of Europe. Based on this, several countries across Europe decided to shut down all air traffic space. And the reason they did that is because they were worried that the volcanic ash would interfere with jet engines. And I don't know how many people remember that because, yeah, you remember that? Yeah? Wow, okay. Anybody else had that kind of experience? You were stuck in England? Okay. So we all have memories of when that happened. And in fact, this really did result in one of the worst disruptions to civil aviation since World War II. But what's interesting is, what we now know is that decisions were made by several governments that were based upon good data, but it wasn't particularly meaningful data. And the reason is that they didn't ask the critical question. The critical question for making decisions about whether to shut down air traffic is, what concentration of volcanic ash is harmful to jet engines? And it isn't that the information wasn't available or the data wasn't there, because it was. It's just that they didn't ask it of the right people. They didn't look for it in the right places because we have, again, this cognitive overload. And what they did is they just looked at the data that was available from the Met scientists, the predictive data that was available in basically large data sets. And that's not the question that was provided by the Met scientists that was answered. And so the biggest policy change since 2010 is that shift from a decision-making process that responded simply to the presence of any ash to one that's based on a safe threshold. So aircraft can now fly as long as the ash concentration does not exceed 0.2 milligrams per cubic meter. And the reason that I wanted to make this point and to tell you the story is that data has to be meaningful to the particular context and to the individual. It doesn't mean the data is not out there. It just means we have to figure out, we have to use not just artificial intelligence, not just predictive data, not just what's in our EHRs, but we also have to use human intelligence as well and use and ask the right questions. So my plea is basically to take a moment to stop and see the person behind every data point. Because when we do, this is what delivering precision medicine can look like. And I think that's essentially what we all want. Personal health and wellness, interactions with healthcare providers, interventions that are targeted and treatment correlated with the patient's molecular profile and that of her disease and post-disease management, a learning healthcare system, family members' healthcare. That is ultimately what delivering successful precision medicine should look like, all the way from birth to a nice old age. So, thank you for your attention, and I am happy to take questions and engage in discussion before we take a break.
Yes, I won't say anything further until after the break.
Okay.
Are you going to share your slide?
Of course.
Yes.
I have everybody's email addresses, and we will send those out.
Were there any questions?
I saw that one in the back, and then, oh, you want to go first? Okay.
So I'm very interested in your qualitative work that shows that these patients are relying very heavily on the input of their doctors, and they actually want some paternalism.
So that's actually quantitative.
It's survey data, right?
Yeah.
So your survey results. And I'm interested in how you are thinking about, kind of from a decision-making perspective, the data that also shows that clinicians are more uncertain about what they should be recommending based on genetic results. And how you kind of see patients wanting more and clinicians being maybe less ready to provide input in some clinical areas at least.
I think it is complex and also very, very challenging. And I think one of the things we need to do is, other than just education, because that's certainly, kind of the pat answer for everything, and it is actually, we do need to do that, because we don't have enough genetics counselors, and we will never have enough genetics counselors, is we do need to find a better point of care clinical decision support systems. We've tried different things in terms of genetic information that pops up in EHRs, and some are better than others, but I haven't yet encountered anyone who actually adores the system they have. And I've heard people say, we've done some work also on clinical workflow issues with providers, and some of the things people say are things like, when you talk to physicians, they say things like, I really just want something that'll help me with point of care diagnosis and prescribing, and not point of care education, which is interesting. It's a very interesting comment. They don't want to be educated so you don't want to have a pop-up that simply says, you have this cytochrome P450 gene variant, whatever it is, and here's what and then you have all this information. They want to know what to do about it and how is this going to help their patient. And that's not necessarily how the current systems of clinical decision support are currently designed. So part of it is working with the users, which include physicians, to design better clinical decision support, as well as working with patients and engaging patients to help us understand better how do they want the information served up. So I think part of the reason that patients want more guidance from physicians and clinicians is because if you just say this is your genetic information without a whole lot of guidance as to what it means and which treatment option it makes it much, much more difficult. So we need to figure out better ways to serve up information. Thank you. And there was another question, yeah.
I just had a question about the component of it being patient-centered. So there are data from studies where people are, if you're talking about the decisional conflict that comes from the additional information.
Right.
And the U.S., for example, and the increased anxiety and stress that having this information causes. And I'm just curious about how we deal with that juxtaposition of patient-centeredness and yet that
Yeah.
But, just curious about it.
No, I think those are great questions. So I think in terms of precision medicine providing information to subpopulations in terms of genetic variations and that kind of thing, and possibly in the future N of 1 type information, that piece of it might be a little bit more patient-centered. So from a biological perspective. In terms of making decisions, and particularly shared decision-making, I think we do have a lot of work to do in terms of what we need to do to but it's work at many levels. It really is a system-wide work in the sense that, you know, if we would get, say, primary care physicians to adopt certain things where they can include that as part of their practice, where it becomes part of standard practice, and then it becomes something as a decision, you know, you have this conversation with your patients and you're able to include it as part of something that you do as for preventative purposes, and maybe it's just you select a few things. Maybe it's not everything, but you select a few things, whether it's melanoma or something else. Maybe that's where we should be starting. You know, so prioritize what things we need to be selecting to move the needle a little bit. It's not an easy question.
Kind of a follow-up to that.
Yeah.
Who should bear the cost of doing testing? What insurance companies don't reimburse this uniformly? Particularly like as it influence patient's care. So yeah, who should bear the cost? Just your ideas about it. I know there's no answer.
There isn't. I think there's increasingly more economic studies that are being done to show, you know, cost effectiveness of various precision medicine type testing, molecular diagnostic testing, and increasingly some of the insurance companies are looking at some of those studies. It's not an easy question in healthcare systems like Canada or the UK or other places where you have universal health care. There's certainly health technology assessment organizations, regulatory or government organizations that actually look into what ends up being on formularies, state or provincial formularies. But these are not easy questions. But I think that ultimately, if we can show, which I think it ultimately will happen, that using precision medicine approaches will ultimately save money in the long run, then it tips the balance. You had a question. John.
So when they, in testing it, you identify people who are at risk of certain things that may not be a specific treatment indicated, and kind of more, the result is some behavior change that the doctor might suggest. Is using these genetic tests, and how often do patients actually end up having a behavior change, or especially as it relates to kind of the preferences people have around these tests themselves?
So there's quite a bit of literature and data in various areas, and it really varies. It just depends. In some cases, there's not the behavior change. I mean, behavior is so complex as it is. If there's anything more complex than human behavior, I'm not sure what it is. It's pretty difficult to change human behavior. So even when you show somebody a test that says this is what even something as simple as look at your cholesterol levels, or look at your hemoglobin A1C and as a diabetic or anything, right? So that's a tough question. But I think there's quite a number of studies in literature where people are looking at does using precision medicine or genetic tests actually influence behavior change in any way? And to date, I don't think there's a whole lot of really striking examples of significant behavioral changes. But I think a lot of that is, of course, you know, we're talking about human behavior.
So that means like a patient-centered point of view that we want to maybe not use those tests for the elderly result with these behavior change, or not make that sort of difference? Or would it be particular to the patient?
That is a good question, and there's lots of debates about that. Do you have something to add about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, that's exactly what I was hearing about at Moffitt, which is that they identified individuals that had a high risk variant for melanoma. Well, the prevention strategies for something that's a high risk are the same as they are. I mean, there's nothing else that's different. You wear a hat, you keep out the sun, you put sunscreen on. And what they're finding in their intervention is that it's not modifying, it's not changing anything, even though you know you're high risk, because it's the same prevention strategies with the general population set. And you would hope that it would actually help, you know, get higher risk individuals. So I mean, I think it's a really reasonable question.
Yeah.
You know, if a high risk variant, you're recommending stop smoking, lose weight, and exercise, that's the same behavioral interventions that we're talking about for everyone. So, which we haven't really moved the needle on much in general.
I think where it makes a difference is if there's actually a preemptive, the BRCA 1 and 2 is where that's I guess the most famous example, right? Where people actually get a prophylactic surgery, or they can get a prophylactic surgery. What's that? But the uptake is quite low, yeah. Yeah. But again, it's true of every human behavior. I mean, you would think that someone seeing pretty horrible effects of having diabetes, including losing toes, etc., when you have diabetes, and knowing that and showing, you know, this is what your hemoglobin A1C is and your glucose levels, might get you to change how you eat and exercise, etc. But we also know it doesn't. So, yeah, it's human nature. Robert.
Possibly a counterexample, except that I don't have any data about it. What is the example of prostate cancer screening?
Hmm.
And so when African American men were told that they were at a higher risk because of their ethnic category, they felt that the fact that they were at a higher risk was somehow an important thing to know, that it was going to motivate them, I assume, to get prostate cancer screening. And at the time I was doing this work, everybody was equally recommended to get prostate cancer screening. You do the models and didn't, I guess somehow the fact that they're at a higher risk didn't translate immediately to the fact that the recommendation would be any different, but yet they seem to have the intention of behaving because they heard that they were at higher risk, which is the opposite of what you described with knowing that you were higher risk of getting melanoma in some. But there you actually have data and have outcome data.
That's interesting.
One interesting idea to follow up with that is the notion that, so I worked with a group that did doing the composite score for breast cancer risk. So that was going to be used to determine the screening strategy. And one of the things the primary care physicians were very interested in about that particular approach, so it's not the actual screening, it's just telling you what your risk is, right? And I can give you more information later, but the interesting part about that approach is a lot of family doctors were very interested to address what they called their worried well population. They had a lot of women at a certain age where you start getting your mammography letters, or who had an aunt or a cousin or somebody that had breast cancer, and they were concerned about their own risk. So actually understanding that you were at population or lower level risk were the group where they thought they'd have the biggest impact. and they would up the screening in the very high-risk group, which is a very small number of women. So it was this notion of not necessarily having an intervention, but stopping people from pursuing unnecessary testing. It was an interesting idea, and the family doctors were very, very interested in that aspect, and I think that the genetic counselors and the oncologists underestimated that in that particular aspect of it. So that's something to think about when you're thinking about the precision medicine aspect.
Other thoughts or questions? Yes?
Just thinking about some of the potential downsides. Not that it doesn't spur, not that learning your genetic risk doesn't spur you to improve your behavior, but what happens in the cases where it makes you do worse things. So for instance, my very good friend who struggled with her weight her whole life sent in a 23andMe test, right? And it came back and it said that she had like a 50% chance of being obese. And at that point, she stopped dieting because she was like, well, it's in my genes. There's nothing I can do about it. So she became very fatalistic about what the 23andMe was, and I told her not to turn this thing in. So I warned her against it. But so now she's convinced she's going to have Alzheimer's and she's going to be fat and there's nothing she can do about any of these things. And obviously that's a danger in getting these results back without the contextualization of a genetic counselor. But,
I was going to ask you, is she happier now that she's not planning?
very happy. Very overweight. But yeah, so I see the sort of the labeling and the fatalism that can come with like now this is my genetic destiny. So therefore, how much can I really avoid it?
That's interesting. Here's your genetic result. Oh, there's nothing we can do, and you're faded versus here's your genetic result. Ah, we have something in our tool chest to help you with that. The role of genetic result is broader than the role of the tool chest.
Yeah.
Do we want to,
Take a
I
break.
don't know how the break set up. But do we
Yeah,
wanna
we're a little bit
take-
early.
We're a little bit early. Do we want to take an early break?
Would you like to take an early break while we set up for the next round? Is going to be great. It's going really interactive.
Yeah, explain to you a tool chest, a tool you can put in a tool chest.
Yeah.
Very different one.
Do you want
So-
to give us an introduction to it and then start it later, or is it not break out?
Sure, actually, no, why don't we do that so that you're not missing out if they bring coffee and tea and everything you might need.
Oh,
So
I-
I'll introduce myself and I'll give you a bit of an introduction.
You know what?
and then we'll-
Somehow it went all the way to your. It went all the way to
It went
this.
to the end? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
So-
thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Amalia. That was excellent. Okay, so Amalia has really just set up perfectly for me the next section of this course. So my name is Jillian Bartlet. I am a professor in family medicine. I was very, very happy to hear somebody else in family medicine. I'm a researcher in family medicine at the Department of Family Medicine at McGill University. And one of the things that is very, very common in family medicine is a lot of great evidence coming out of very specialized settings that are then passed on to family physicians with no awareness that it may not be relevant for them, it may not be applicable to their patients, and they may not be able to work with this. And this happens in a lot of different settings. So this is where I became interested in what we call knowledge translation. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about a path where I realized we have, and everybody's mentioned it in the discussions and in your introductions and what you're preoccupied with, where we have a lot of great ideas and a lot of great information, and we fail on the implementation. We fail on the uptake, and people are still struggling to get basic care. So I have no disclosures. Unfortunately, I have no conflicts of interest, especially financial ones. And I'm funded by the different Canadian peer review funding agencies
And I am based in Canada, so when you ask about who should pay for things, I've got a very different answer for you. I pay a lot in taxes, so that's a moot point. We just pay for stuff. But we can talk about that discussion a bit more. What I'm going to do is talk to you about a tool that I have developed and how I got there. And we're going to talk about how this tool might be used, and then how it's a game and how this game works. And so what we'll do is I'll give you this introductory, and I'll stop at a certain point so we can take a break, and then we're going to come back and you're going to play the game. Because there's a lot of things about decision making that if you're not that patient, and I hope you're never this patient, you will not understand. And one of the things about the tool, jump ahead a little bit here, is what we're actually trying to do is place a value on pharmacogenomic testing in this difficult decision-making situation. Because why would you spend a lot of money developing a tool if it's going to make no difference? And it's very interesting that all the comments are like, but we're doing this, and nothing changes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and about how we can make sure that if we're going to invest time, effort, and resources, which are all constrained no matter what healthcare system you're talking about, that it is making a difference. So Anthony's story. Because I'm an expert in knowledge translation, I'm often asked to be part of grants where they've got a great idea and they actually have no idea how to make sure clinicians use it. Fairly common scenario, and you heard a little bit about what patients were thinking about that and the role of clinicians. So I was asked to work with a group that was working in pediatric oncology. I think I heard somebody here is in pediatrics, one of the course members, yeah, okay. It's a pediatric oncology group, and essentially they had developed a pharmacogenomic, it's not pharmacogenomic, it's a laboratory-derived test, blood test, to type 4 different brain tumors that are typically really difficult to assess. So this brain tumor is something that if you just use histology, there's 4 different types that look the same and are treated the same. There's one genetic mutation the team identified that if the child has that genetic mutation, they are not going to respond to any treatment, even clinical trials. There's nothing developed for this tumor, and it's a catastrophic diagnosis. Within 6 months, the child will be dead. This is without exception in this tumor. They don't have a massive sample size, but every single tumor that has this mutation, that is a scenario in the outcome. So when the team was looking to develop the test that would be used in all hospitals, there wasn't the cost issue, that was going to be included in the care. Basically, they wanted to, they felt the biggest barrier to implementation is how to explain the test to families, okay? And that's typically what we think. If people say, oh, you need education, you need to let people know, and then it'll take care of it. And we know that that doesn't actually work. So one of the things that my research revealed, because I actually use a form of deliberation, a form of group debates with, I did this with oncologists, pediatric palliative care specialists, and then I did it with parents of children in active treatment and parents whose children had died. So I did a series of debates. And the challenge to implementing this test, the reason this test, if it was implemented today, would make no difference to treatment plans, is there is a very firm belief held by oncologists and a fair few patients that removal of hope is more harmful than the toxicity of futile curative treatment. So just sit with that for a moment. That they would rather give a young child an incredibly toxic treatment, chemotherapy, on the notion that they could be the 1 in a million that responds, even though they have a test in hand that says, no, this child is not going to respond no matter what you do. The other thing you run up against here, to be fair to the clinicians and the parents, is that in our society, and pretty much every society that I know of, that I've seen any kind of anthropological studies on, the death of a child is completely taboo. How do you know this? We have no word to describe it, okay? If a spouse dies, you're a widow or a widower. If your parents die, you're an orphan. If your child dies, what are you? Are you still a parent? There's no child. We have no name for it, Okay, that's how taboo the death of a child is. So there was an excellent book written 40 years ago about a woman who went basically onto the oncology wards, and it's into the private worlds of dying children. And she observed something called mutual pretense. Everybody knows the child's dying. Everybody acts in a way as if the child isn't. So you can imagine when you're trying to make treatment decisions or you have a test that confirms a child is going to die, what do you decide? What do you do as a parent? What do you do as a clinician? How do you advise people? What treatment do you do? So the clinicians also said to me that, they said, Jill, we realize this is like a really horrible situation, but you need to tell us what the parents and the families want, and then we can maybe do something differently. So I spoke to the parents. I got a lot of information from them. And what I realized is we cannot ask that question in a clinical context. You cannot, at the time of giving any diagnosis, as soon as what they call the C word is introduced, basically, as soon as a family hears that, it's like white static for the next, God knows how long. So they do want information. They do want to make informed choices. And they had very explicit views on how that could be done. But we realized that they need information from other people to say, somebody in your situation with a child of this characteristics, this is what they favored in terms of treatment and why. And none of that information exists. And there's a lot of, and I'll talk to you about why it doesn't exist. But so we need that information when it's especially challenging when it's a rare disease. Thankfully, childhood cancer, even though it's one of the #1 killers of children, is rare. When there's no effective curative treatment or treatments have incredibly toxic side effects. And you need to be able to have this as a shared decision-making that will maximize quality of life for a patient. And obviously, when you're talking in a situation where you're maximizing the quality of life for a child who is ending life, it's very, very complicated. Now, I'm talking about an extreme situation, and this is not the research I do all the time because this is very, very challenging research to do. But you can think about all the topics you brought up here. Okay, you think about a topic where there's a potential to do prophylactic treatment that's pretty, severe. Like a double mastectomy is not something that should be considered lightly as prophylactic surgery. Or you think about a situation where someone would like to preface or would like to preference something about their quality of life that might not be socially acceptable. So you're probably thinking, what on earth are you talking about? Medication that makes you gain weight. Would you rather be ill or would you rather have the weight gain? And a lot of people, if a doctor asks you that question, like, oh, of course, I'd rather be better. And then as soon as you start gaining the weight, they put the medication aside because no, they would rather not put on that extra weight and suffer. Would you rather be seen as ill? So kids, inhalers. Anybody that does asthma in kids know that kids hate taking their inhalers to school. Parents pay a small fortune in trying to keep EpiPens and inhalers on their kids or in their backpacks because kids don't want to be seen as ill. Because that is, you might as well just, sign up with the War Games crowd and just, become a social pariah as soon as you pull out something that indicates you are a sick person. So there's a lot of situations, and you can think about this. This comes up a lot with families. There's people that would rather say no to chemotherapy, but that would mean admitting to their family that they don't want to be that sick and maybe get better. So there's a lot of situations where you could think about this might be an issue. So this is why I came up with a role-playing game. When you're talking about health-related quality of life information, and this is used a lot in doing cost analysis and benefit analysis, like what do people prefer, Amalia referenced it in patient preferences. In pediatric settings and other settings, this information is just missing, or it's obtained by asking the parents. And you can imagine how social norms play into that, like being viewed as a good parent, right? And it also assumes that the parent understands their child's priorities at that point in time. And the thing with the mutual pretense, the children engage in it as well. They feel very, very protective of their families. So they're going to say things that are going to protect their parents and their families. So you can also think about this where other situations where this data is missing. So you're basically talking about anybody who's of non-European descent in any kind of minority population. You're not going to have this information. The questions we ask are culturally developed. So even if you do ask the questions, you're not probably getting the answer you need for these questions. So you definitely you can't ask direct questions when mutual pretense or any violation of social norms or social expectations is in effect. But if you do a role-playing game, you can put the quality of life measures. In this case, I used EQ5DY, which is a validated quality of life measure, to basically the characteristics of the person as well as the treatment decisions they're making, and then see if that changes when you introduce pharmacogenomics testing. So the benefits is that it allows you to collect, because people are playing a role, you can collect a lot of data. I don't have to, thankfully, ask a very sick child and their family to participate in a research project at a time when they are focused on just, surviving and trying to figure out what the best options are. So this is not, this game doesn't happen as a decision aid tool yet. I'll get to how it can be. This is to collect health-related quality of life on treatment preferences across a wide population of many different participants and settings. It works with kids, adolescents, and adults. The key point here is it provides a mental and emotionally safe space using roles. So if you pick an unpopular decision, you're not picking it, your character is picking it. Your character that loves sports is picking a treatment option that's not going to impact their heart so that they can continue to play sports and they're not going to be tired and have no energy. You see how this allows people to express preferences without having to take the ownership of that preference. And the fact that it's got something behind it that people aren't aware of, this was a very challenging thing that I had to do, is how to get, you'll see in the cards what the language sounds like, because everybody has to be able to understand this. And working with oncologists and health economists to get that language matched up to what they think of as adverse effects and health-related quality of life was really a lot of fun. That took a long time. And it also allows us to do this in a vulnerable population where we couldn't do data collection during a clinical visit. The bonus that was a bit incidental but can't be underestimated is actually playing the game itself facilitates education and engagement of people who aren't necessarily in that clinical situation. They have a better understanding of what goes into clinical decision making. So shared decision making is no longer just a sort of a neat idea or something they hear. They actually, everybody who's played this has said, I had no idea. And I had researchers and I had clinicians playing this game. And none of them had any idea what a family in this situation is faced with in terms of treatment decisions. So that's good. Where are we at? Okay, so the first version of this game, which you're going to see after the break, is based on the GoPGX project. It's a pediatric oncology treatment project that is looking for markers of adverse effects in the different treatment options. And in this case, we used hepatoblastoma, so liver cancer in kids, because there's two specific drugs used to treat this, cisplatin and doxorubicin, that have very, very specific, one significant side effect each that has a huge impact on the quality of life. So cisplatin can cause deafness. And if deafness occurs under a certain age, it actually has a massive impact on language formation. So the other one is doxorubicin, which has a very big impact on heart. It can, so one of the things with childhood cancer is great, they survived and they don't have the cancer, but how great is that if you have a heart attack at 21? So there's a heart failure and heart problems, and you'll see the profile related to that. So why we chose this as well is because we can put out treatment options. There are different treatment options, although I had to work with the oncologist because, of course, they think that the only treatment option is the one with the highest survival. So we had to move beyond that thinking and get a couple of different treatment options. Then I could introduce PGX testing results, which changes the likelihood of getting one of these side effects. So this is an example. Typically, when you start out the autotoxicity, so the risk of deafness of 74%, that's what we know without any genomic testing. So they try and track the kids really carefully, and then they have to back off the dose when they start to see hearing impairment. There is 40% of the population, sorry, not 40%, there's about 25% of the population, they're actually at really low risk of that side effect. So if you were in that 25%, you'd want to take the higher dose cisplatin because it's got a very good survival profile. No, these are from actual studies. And actually all the side effect profiles are from actual studies, which also highlighted many, many gaps we have in our known side effects. It's truly useful for this, but it's also to demonstrate how you could potentially use it in different contexts. So they're actually building a pharmacogenomics panel on 10 different treatments for different conditions. And what we're also trying to demonstrate, what we'll see if we demonstrate, I'm not trying to demonstrate it, I'm interested to see if it happens, is whether treatment preferences change with the addition of precision information. So for example, if families act the same way as oncologists and always pick the highest cure, then this is not relevant. We don't need to engage in this discussion. You can just say, everybody always prefers this because it's got the highest cure, and you just need to keep track of those, survival stats. But if they have a certain treatment preference and then you introduce the PGX and that changes, then we know the pharmacogenomics testing can change how people interpret the treatment preferences. And just to let you know, there is 12% of the population that if they test positive for those genetic markers will experience deafness. It's what is it? It's 88%. In terms of side effects, that's a fairly high, we're not very good at interpreting risk, but that's really high, and it's something most people are no longer comfortable. That's for cisplatin. There's another one for autotoxicity. I'm just showing this for effect. So I'm going to talk about our hypothesis, and then when we come back, I'll talk about how the game works, and we'll play around. You can see it. Our hypothesis is that the baseline health-related quality of life will impact treatment decisions, and as will the adverse effects profile. So what do I mean by that? We have two scenarios we play with, what we call a good prognosis, stage 1 cancer, and what we call a stage 3, so a poor prognosis. So there's only so many things we could manipulate with a game. One is we wanted to see how treatment decisions change by because the stage 3, the child got a far lower initial quality of life because they're experiencing a lot of pain and a lot of symptoms and a whole bunch of issues, which you'll get to read about. We also believe that the values of the characters or the roles will influence the tolerance of different adverse effects. So this actually came from a real life scenario where Bruce Carlton is my main collaborator with this. He's developing a lot of the background science that is fueling this game. He would have somebody call up and say, my daughter is trilingual, and do I really want her to be deaf for the last 6 months of her life, and what would you do? So this is based on a lot of my work and Bruce's clinical work. It draws on some of that, also in the published adverse effects profile. So we think that people who have kids that have specific characteristics impacted by this side effect profile will make decisions differently. And we also, our hypothesis is that the additional information provided by precision medicine tools will impact people's decisions in their ordering and preferences. So with that, we are right on time to take the break, and hopefully something's actually out there. So when you come back, you can learn how to play Anthony's game, and I'll tell you a little bit about who Anthony was. We're scheduled for a half-hour break. Okay, so I'm going to put this to vote. I'm fine with you guys taking the full half hour if you really want to break, but if you guys would actually like to end earlier, we can take a 15-minute break. You want to be out of here 15 minutes earlier? Yeah, okay, I think I didn't see any. I see a lot of, that's very qualitative research. I'm doing my ethnographic observation of all of you that you only want a 15-minute break and you want to get out of here. Okay, 15 minutes, we'll be back at 3:45. I want 3 people at each table. I'm going to give you a character card. Normally we play this with 6 people. We're going to play with 6 groups. And actually it works better in this situation, then you can talk about things amongst yourselves. So we're missing a few people coming back, but I'll start with the tables that already have 3 in them. So,
You want to hand it out now or
in a second. Okay. Oh, actually, we'll wait for everybody to come back and then I will hand these out. What I will do in the meantime is go over the game. Okay. So Anthony's game is named after a young man named Anthony. But if we don't go, we're going to end late. I'll still give you the backstory because it's not essential to the gameplay. So Anthony, when I was doing my work with the parents, originally Anthony's mom, Anne, was in my group of parents whose children had been diagnosed with a form of cancer and survived. They were in remission, so they had gotten treatment and survived. And there was a lot of different cancers, but they all agreed to talk with me. So Anthony had been diagnosed with a form of brain cancer, and it was considered in remission. During the course of the deliberations with the parents, it came back. And Anthony was just such a typical case of how this tends to work for families. So his mom essentially gave up her career as a researcher to care for him because they lived a certain distance from the hospital. And of course, then the father was responsible for keeping the family financially together while he underwent treatment. And I'm mentioning that because even though we're in a Canadian context, there are some serious financial implications to families whose children have cancer. So he did chemotherapy, it wasn't working. And then the oncologist had a conversation with Anthony's family while Anthony, who was a 13-year-old boy, was in the room, saying there's another drug that you could try, but you'd have to pay for it out of pocket because it's still experimental. And there's a genetic test to see if you'd respond to this drug, if Anthony would respond to this drug. So they're like, okay. They did the genetic test. He did not have the markers to be responsive to this treatment. So you could imagine what happened next was that, again, with Anthony in the room, they said, well, there's a chance it might still work. So 4 weeks of treatment, $4,000 out of pocket for a family who was down to 1 income earner. And it did not work, as the genetic test predicted. And several months later, Anthony died. So when I spoke to Anne, who then joined my group of parents whose children had died, we were talking about this, and she said that one of the things about the game and why the parents, I realized, were willing to talk to me and were so grateful is that for them, they never get over this, right? But people don't want to talk about a child who's died. So this is a way to make meaning out of a meaningless situation. So I asked her if she would be okay with Anthony naming the game after him, and she was very touched by that. And a lot of the patients' names, we've had to change the characteristics, but the actual names of the kids comes from our families, and it's a memorial to their children who died from cancer. And Yeah, so there's more work that's coming out of that, including all the things I did, small video testimonials asking them what they'd like to say to healthcare professionals when dealing with families with cancer. But that's another thing that will go into training materials. Okay, so have we got everybody back? I think we've got everybody back. Okay, what I need you to do is make sure you're sitting at a table with all three. So maybe if you could come up to this one, then our tables are all filled out. So what I'm going to do is essentially what you get with each thing, what I'm going to do first is hand out the character cards. And you're going to work in groups of 3 for, you guys are a group of 2, but you can, if anybody shows up, they join your group. So you're going to you're going to read about this character. And then we're going to do an icebreaker exercise I do at the start of the game. And then you're going to, in your character with your group, rank. Amalia will, when we're ready for that, she'll hand out the scorecards. We'll give you the treatment scenarios, and you're going to rank which treatments your character would prefer to have. Now, there's a couple of things about how we play this game that do not reflect real life. 1, all the treatments are on the table right from the get-go. That's not normally how clinical visits go. 2, the child character is the trump card. If the group can't agree on their ranking, so when we come back to have a group decision, the child's preferences win. And as a researcher, I make note of when that happens. And because it's interesting when people can't agree and why. And then we're going to do the genomics test results, and you're going to do the ranking again given the genomics test results. So first, you need to get into character.
Characters that we would be playing, and then how you will collect the ethnographic information and like how that description works, because that's not an area that I'm familiar with at all, but how you will standardize that collection and come up with the things that are important.
Yeah, there's so what I'm hoping with the ethnographic observation is to highlight areas, because people will rarely get into a big, massive conflict in a gaming situation, right? They're not that invested in it. But what I am trying to pick up is the nonverbal communication around points of strong disagreement. So what is it that in the treatments or specific aspects of the treatments that brought out the most disagreement? And that disagreement is often expressed nonverbally. So, if somebody's saying something and you don't feel invested to argue it, but you lean back and you cross your arms, that's a pretty strong, I do not agree with this. So I'll be looking for those things in the decision-making process, because they've got to come to decisions. And so it's really interesting, because what is tending to come out now is the survival versus the quality of life of the kids. That's where we're seeing the most discrepancy in agreements. As for real life.
The nuance in here is, I thought the nuance was some of the things were permanent, they were not necessarily permanent, and really you have to kind of look at the probability of it happening and the probability of whether it's going to be permanent.
But as per real life, right?
Yep.
You're given the probability. If you're the person that gets it, the probability is meaningless to you, right?
Yep.
So, and you won't know until you try it. So this is also where we were very much trying to replicate what people had to think about and what they had to keep in mind, and all of the different things that they process. And part of this also partially based on the EQ5D, but it's also partially based on what the information I got from the parents.
So thank you, Jill, and appreciate that. And just before we end the course, I want to thank all of you for your participation and very active engagement. This is one of the most actively engaged courses I have ever been to at Society for Medical Decision Making. So I am actually a member. I know Jill isn't, but I have been a member for some time. And I hope that we have met some of your expectations and that we have not cognitively burdened you too much with the complexity of precision medicine decision making. I also would like to thank and acknowledge the Betty Ann Gordon Moore Foundation who for their support. And I want to remind you that the Society for Medical Decision Making will be sending you electronically course evaluations. So please do fill those out because they do help us we would like that feedback, and we would like to be able to continue to improve our course offerings each year. And if you have our, I did send out some information to you, some materials yesterday, so you do have our email addresses. So if you would like to contact us by email, please feel free to do that. So at any time.
We'll be sending you PDFs of the slide.
Yeah.
And yes, that's my dog, Cooper.
Yeah.
And in case you're wondering, that's the east coast of Canada. That's the Bay of Fundy.
Yeah. So any other thoughts or questions before we end, or no? All right. Well, thank you again for everything, and have a wonderful evening, and enjoy the rest of the